Thank you for viewing the October 7th, 2019 broadcast of Touring News Daily. The show contains news from the past 24 to 72 hours that myself and my online community find important. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and visit me at twitch.tv/touringnews to see the live behind-the-scenes work of how these stories get produced. In one of the biggest stories of the day, U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria. On Sunday, the White House said Turkey will soon move forward with its long-planned military operation to create what it calls a, quote, safe zone, quote, in northern Syria, and U.S. forces will not support or be involved in it. A United States official said American troops had withdrawn from 2 observation posts on the border at Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain, and had told the commander of the SDF that the United States would not defend SDF from an imminent Turkish offensive. United States troops elsewhere in Syria remain in position. The pullback will initially be limited in scope to a patch of territory near the Turkish border where both countries had been working to establish a special security area, a United States official told Reuters on Monday. Turkey has long argued for the establishment of a 20-mile safe zone along the border under Turkish control, driving back the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia, which is the dominant force in the SDF alliance and which Ankara considers a terrorist organization and a threat to its national security. The United States had helped the YPG defeat Islamic State militants. Quote, a quote from Donald Trump, President of the United States, on his Twitter, and this will be a longer quote. The United States was supposed to be in Syria for 30 days. That was many years ago. We stayed and got deeper and deeper into battle with no aim in sight. When I arrived in Washington, ISIS was running rampant in the area. We quickly defeated 100% of the ISIS caliphate, including capturing thousands of ISIS fighters, mostly from Europe. But Europe did not want them back. They said, "You keep them, USA." I said, "No. We did you a great favor, and now you want us to hold them in United States prisons at tremendous cost. They are yours for trials." They again said no. Holding them in United States prisons thinking as usual that the United States is always the sucker on NATO, on trade, on everything. The Kurds fought with us, but were paid massive amounts of money and equipment to do so. They have been fighting Turkey for decades. I held off this fight for almost 3 years, but it is time for us to get out of these endless, ridiculous wars, many of them tribal, and bring our soldiers home. We will fight where it is our benefit and only fight to win. Turkey, Europe, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Russia, and the Kurds will now have to figure the situation out and what they want to do with the captured ISIS fighters in their neighborhood. The tweet is still continuing. They hate all ISIS. We have been enemies for years. We are 7,000 miles away and will crush ISIS again if they come anywhere near us. I was elected on getting out of these ridiculous, endless wars where our great military functions as a policing operation to the benefit of people who don't even like the USA. The 2 most unhappy countries at this move are Russia and China because they love seeing us so bogged down, watching over a quagmire and spending big dollars to do so. When I took over, our military was totally depleted. Now it is stronger than ever before. The endless and ridiculous wars are ending. We will be focused on the big picture, knowing we can always go back and blast. As I have stated strongly before, and just to reiterate, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey. I've done this before. They must, with Europe and others, watch over the captured ISIS fighters and families. The United States has done far more than anyone could ever have expected, including the capture of 100% of the ISIS caliphate. It is time now for others in the region, some of great wealth, to protect their own territory. The United States is great. End the tweet from Donald Trump, President of the United States. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said on Monday that the United States troops had started to withdraw from parts of the northeast Syria after his phone call with United States President Donald Trump, adding the talks between Turkish and United States officials on the matter would continue. Syrian Democratic Forces official Mustafa Bali said, quote, "The American forces did not fulfill their commitments and withdrew their forces from the border areas with Turkey, and Turkey is now preparing for an invasion operation of northern and eastern Syria. U.S. forces were, quote, leaving the areas to turn into a war zone, end quote. But the U.S. statement today was a surprise, and we can say that it is a stab in the back for the SDF. SDF spokesman Kino Gabriel said in an interview with Al Hadath TV. The White House said, quote, Turkey will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters in the area captured over the past 2 years. The United States will not hold them for what could be many years and great cost to the United States taxpayer. In a quote from Erdogan's spokesman Ibrahim Kalin on Twitter, "The safe one has two aims: to secure our borders by clearing away terrorist elements and to achieve the return of refugees in a safe way." In comments from the Kremlin, the strongest foreign ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Syria's territorial integrity had to be preserved, and Moscow continued to seek the withdrawal of all foreign forces illegally present in Syria. Turkey says it wants to settle up to 2 million Syrian refugees in the zone. It hosts 3.6 million Syrians sheltering from their country's more than 8-year-old conflict. Erdogan had expressed his frustration with the failure of the United States military and security officials to implement the agreement between the countries on a safe zone. The NATO allies agreed in August to establish a zone in northern Syria along the Turkish border. Turkey wants the safe zone to be 30 kilometers across and 400 kilometers long. In recent breaking tweets from United States Senator Lindsey Graham, he, quote, "just spoke to Senator Chris Van Hollen about the situation in Syria. We will introduce bipartisan sanctions against Turkey if they invade Syria and will call for the suspension from NATO if they attack Kurdish forces who assisted the United States in the destruction of the ISIS caliphate. Hope and expect sanctions against Turkey, if necessary, would be veto-proof. This decision to abandon our Kurdish allies and turn Syria over to Russia, Iran, and Turkey will put every radical Islamist on steroids, shot in the arm to bad guys, devastating for the good guys," end quote. The United Nations said, quote, "Any military operation that takes place at the moment has to take into account to ensure that we don't see any further displacement," Momzis told reporters in Geneva. "We are hoping for the best but preparing for the worst." Turkey has long argued for the establishment of the 20-mile safe zone along the border under Turkish control, driving back the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia, which is the dominant force in the SDF alliance and which Ankara considers a terrorist organization and a threat to its national security. Momzis asked about the Turkish offensive against Kurdish-led forces and the safe zone idea and said, quote, "I really cannot think about what type or how would the intervention be or how extensive it is going to be in terms of the military operation that will take place. For us, as the United Nations, the safe zone concept is one that we have a bitter history with and we actually never promote or encourage. We don't think it is something that had worked for the United Nations, keeping in mind Srebrenica and what had happened in the past," he said. He was referring to the slaughter of the Bosnian Serb troops of 8,000 Muslim men and boys in 1995 in a United Nations declared safe zone where Dutch peacekeepers were unable to protect civilians. Quote, "We understand that there is going to be some kind of security zone which will be very specifically targeted to a military operation or to an area where there has to be some clearance," Momzis said. "So our hope is that there will be full cooperation by all to make sure it happens as smoothly as possible, without resulting in displacement, and ensuring protection of civilians, ensuring that the basic principles of humanity will be respected on the ground." End quote. Syria's territorial integrity must be preserved, once again spoken by the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, reiterating on Monday as the United States announced it was pulling troops from northeast Syria. Peskov told reporters that Moscow was aware that Turkey shared Russia's position on Syria's territorial integrity and, quote, "We hope that our Turkish colleagues would stick to this position in all situations." The United States Supreme Court turns away a Puerto Rico pension fund dispute. On Monday, October 7th, the United States Supreme Court declined to take up a dispute over the assets of Puerto Rico's largest public sector pension fund. A January 2019 lower court ruling found bondholders owning nearly $3 billion worth of debt issued by Puerto Rico's employees' retirement system, have a legitimate claim on the pension fund assets. This ruling will hold. The United States justices refused to hear an appeal by Puerto Rico's federally created Financial Oversight Board. Lebanon-United Arab Emirates trade relations. Lebanon is seeking investments from the United Arab Emirates, according to Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri during a Monday visit to Abu Dhabi. Addressing an investment conference in the Emirati capital, Hariri said he sought investments in food, infrastructure, oil and gas, and renewable energy. Quote, "We are here to enhance public-private partnerships between Lebanon and the United Arab Emirates," Hariri told the conference. To raise cash earmarked for financing maturing debts and shoring up shaky public finances, Lebanon is preparing to sell a euro bond of around 2 billion United States dollars this month. A country that once held high reserves of foreign currency have had those reserves decline due to capital inflow reductions in the banking system from Lebanese living abroad. United Arab Emirates Economy Minister Sultan bin Saeed Al Mansouri told the conference the UAE was ready to be economic partners with Lebanon. Ratings agency Fitch downgraded Lebanon to CCC in August, citing debt servicing concerns, while S&P Global affirmed Lebanon at B- to B with a negative outlook. Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund. Due to strong economic growth, Norway plans to spend less money next year from its $1.1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the largest in the world. Quote, "The Norwegian economy is in its third year of economic expansion. Economic activity is expanding throughout the country and in most sectors. The strong performance of the Norwegian economy is expected to continue," the finance ministry said in a statement. The growth has raised interest rates 4 times. This growth has been driven by large investments in offshore and oil and gas production. The central bank has raised interest rates 4 times in the last year. Under its 2020 draft budget, cash spending from the fund will decline to 243.6 billion Norwegian crowns next year from 246.2 billion crowns in 2019. Unlike most other nations, which must take on debt if they seek to spend more than they earn from taxes and other revenues, Norwegian governments can instead use up to 3% each year of the saved-up wealth fund to plug deficits. The 2020 budget would suspend 2.6% of the estimated January 1st value of Norway's wealth fund, down from 2.9% in 2019. Built in 1996 to save petroleum reserves for future generations, the size of the sovereign wealth fund has grown to almost 3 times that of Norway's annual GDP, far exceeding original projections. Crown Estate, the Queen to auction off offshore seabed rights. The Crown Estate has opened the first leasing round for offshore wind farms in a decade to usher in a new generation of wind projects expected to eventually generate an investment of up to £20 billion. The leasing round will require for the first time an option fee, which will be used as the basis for a rent agreement over 10 years while the wind farm is developed. In the past, the Crown's chief revenue stream from offshore wind was received as a percentage of the wind farm's income once it began selling the electricity it generated. The leasing round is expected to hand a record windfall to the Crown Estate, potentially generating hundreds of millions of pounds. The royal family gets a 25% cut of revenue from the Crown Estate. The business passes surplus revenues to the Treasury. The Crown Estate is one of the largest property managers in the United Kingdom, administering property worth £14.1 billion. The estate's extensive portfolio is overseen by a semi-independent, incorporated public body headed by the Crown Estate Commissioners, who exercise, quote, "the powers of ownership," quote, "of the estate, although they are not," quote, "owners in their own right," end quote. Elections in Portugal. With over half the votes counted so far, Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa's Socialist Party leads with 36.7% and will be forced to form a minority government. Mr. Costa has won re-election but has no outright majority in Parliament. Mr. Costa said Portuguese voters had shown they wanted his party to continue its pact with the 2 far-left parties, the Left Bloc and the Communists. Negotiations with the People, Animals, Nature part have also been mentioned. Mr. Costa is expected to renew his commitment to stick to eurozone budget rules. Taiwan comments on Chinese expansion. Quote, "We have seen reports that China is interested in reopening this radar station in Kiribati and building a naval base in western province of Solomon Islands," Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, pictured on the screen, stated at a forum on cooperation among countries in the Pacific, quote, "From the long-term strategic perspective, like-minded friends and partners should really be worried whether the Pacific remain free and open and whether the key actors follow the rules-based international order. I certainly don't want to see the Pacific turned into another South China Sea, with us one day all sighing that it is too late for us to do anything," Wu said. General Electric to freeze pension plans for 20,000 United States workers. In a drastic move to cut debt and reduce its pension by $8 billion, General Electric said it will freeze pension plans for around 20,000 United States employees with salaried benefits. CEO Larry Culp has also chopped the dividend to a penny. The company said it will also freeze supplementary pension benefits for about 700 United States employees who became executives before 2011. GE's pension plan has been closed to new entrants since 2012. Quote, returning GE to a position of strength has required us to make several difficult decisions, and today's decision to freeze the pension is no exception. Quote, Chief Human Resources Officer Kevin Cox. The company said it will offer a limited-time lump sum payment to about 100,000 former employees who have not yet started their monthly pension plans. The company also said it would pre-fund about $4 billion to $5 billion of its requirements for 2021 and 2022 under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act by using a portion of the $38 billion in cash it is collecting from the sale of its various businesses. General Electric and its financing arm had total borrowings of about $105.8 billion as of June 30th, with industrial net debt at $54.4 billion. In August of 2019, General Electric was accused by Bernie Madoff and Enron whistleblower Harry Markopolos of engaging in a $38 billion accounting fraud. Markopolos suggests that an accounting rule change for insurance liabilities and a significant lack of reserves to cover long-term care liabilities will push GE to take a $29 billion hit. Markopolos also said GE misclassified its investment in Baker Hughes, an oil and gas business. He said that by misclassifying its ownership stake, General Electric hid a $9.1 billion loss last year. General Electric said it disclosed potential losses of $7.4 billion related to Baker Hughes in a recent federal filing and stood by how it classified the business. Independent of Markopolos' report, GE Capital was already facing investigations, including an inquiry by the Securities and Exchange Commission about the previous $15 billion hit. Judge rejects Trump request to block New York subpoena for tax returns. A federal judge on Monday rejected Donald Trump's request to block Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance from enforcing a subpoena for 8 years of tax returns related to a criminal probe into the United States president and his family business. Hong Kong protests. Protesters formed large circles inside multi-level shopping malls and chanted, quote, disband Hong Kong police force, quote, fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong, quote, and I have the right to wear a mask, quote. The introduction of colonial-era emergency powers on Friday, banning face masks, has sparked some of the most violent clashes in 4 months of demonstrations. On Monday, Hong Kong's metro rail system, which typically carries about 5 million passengers a day, was only partially operating due to what authorities said was serious vandalism on Sunday night. Some stations were torched in the protests. What started as opposition to a now-withdrawn extradition bill has grown into a pro-democracy movement against what is seen as Beijing's increasing grip on the city, which protesters say undermine a one-country, two-system status promised when Britain handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997. HSBC to cut up to 10,000 jobs in order to slash costs. HSBC Holdings is planning to cut up to 10,000 jobs, more than 4% of its workforce, as interim Chief Executive Officer Noel Quinn seeks to reduce costs across the banking group. The Financial Times reported on Sunday. Any job cuts implemented as part of the latest plan would come on top of the redundancies announced earlier. Iraq protest death toll continues to rise. At least 15 people were killed in clashes between Iraqi security forces and protesters overnight in Baghdad's Sadr City district as violence from a week-long nationwide uprising swept through the vast, poor swath of the capital for the first time. At least 110 people have been killed across Iraq in the worst wave of violence since the defeat of Islamic State nearly 2 years ago, with protesters demanding the removal of Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi and a government they accuse of corruption. The military said early on Monday it was withdrawing from Sadr City and handing over to police in an apparent effort to de-escalate tension there. It is the biggest wave of violence in the country since an insurgency by the Sunni Muslim Islamist group Islamic State was put down in the north in 2017, and the worst street unrest to hit the capital Baghdad in around a decade. United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Abdul Mahdi in a phone call that he trusted the Iraqi forces and supported the Iraqi government in restoring security. A statement from the Prime Minister's office said. The government has offered to spend more money on subsidizing housing programs for the poor, stipends for the unemployed, and training programs and loan initiatives for youth. Iraqi authorities also said they would hold to account members of the security forces who acted wrongly in the crackdown on protests. The protesters demand the overhaul of what they say is an entire corrupt system and political class that has held the country back. Climate change protests block central London, 135 arrested. Climate change protesters blocked traffic across London's government district of Westminster on Monday as they launched 2 weeks of peaceful civil disobedience to call for urgent action to curb carbon emissions. Police said they had arrested 135 activists from the Extinction Rebellion group by 11:30 Greenwich Mean Time. Quote, "We're here because the government is not doing enough on the climate emergency," said protester Lizzie Mansfield. Quote, "We only get one planet, and so we're here to try and defend it," end quote. Extinction Rebellion rose to prominence in April when it disrupted traffic in central London for 11 days. More than 1,000 activists were arrested, of whom 850 were prosecuted for various public order offenses. So far, 250 have been convicted. The Metropolitan Police has adopted more proactive tactics this time. Police chiefs said last week they would mobilize thousands of officers to handle the protests and that anyone who broke the law, even as part of a nonviolent civil disobedience, would be arrested. Quote, "People in the environmental movement and climate scientists have been trying to persuade the public and government to take serious action and nothing has happened. We want to use any way we can to make people and governments sit up and notice," said Richard Dyer, a retired doctor from Scotland. The New York Fed awards $47.05 billion in overnight repos. The New York Federal Reserve on Monday awarded $47.05 billion United States dollars of a maximum $75 billion United States dollars to primary dealers at an operation of overnight repurchase agreements in an effort to maintain the federal funds rate within its target range of 1.75% to 2%. Monday's amount was larger than the $38.55 billion in overnight repos the regional central bank awarded on Friday, the New York Fed website showed. White House confirms United States-China trade talks starting Thursday. Top United States officials will welcome a high-ranking Chinese delegation starting October 10th for the latest round of trade talks aimed at easing tensions between the world's two largest economies, the White House confirmed on Monday. Quote, "The two sides will look to build on the deputy-level talks of the past weeks. Topics of discussion will include forced technology transfer, intellectual property rights, services, non-tariff barriers, agriculture, and enforcement," end quote, White House spokeswoman Stephanie Grisham said in a statement. United States-Japan trade deal. The deal's full text has not been released and remains classified, but congressional aides, trade experts, and industry groups briefed on it say that it offers worse access to Japan for some United States agriculture goods than the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a now 11-country trade deal that Trump withdrew from on the third day in office in 2017. Quote, "There are some specific parts of the ag sector that really do benefit from this," Matthew Goodman, an Asian economics expert at the Center for the Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Quote, "More broadly, this is not a highly significant deal from a commercial perspective, as it doesn't touch the biggest item in a bilateral trade, autos and auto parts," end quote. The United States-Japan agriculture-centered deal is noticeable for what it leaves out. It does not include the bulk of products that make up the bilateral trading relationship, notably autos from Japan and aircraft, liquefied propane gas, and semiconductor manufacturing equipment from the United States. Motor vehicles and parts, by far the largest Japanese export to the United States at $56 billion in 2018, were left out for a later phase of negotiations. Abe said Trump agreed not to impose threatened Section 232 tariffs on Japanese cars and parts on national security grounds. Half of eurozone banks wouldn't survive a cash drought, according to the ECB. Half of the eurozone's biggest banks wouldn't survive a 6-month cash drought, with larger firms and subsidiaries of foreign institutions among the most vulnerable, the European Central Bank said on Monday. 52 would go under within 6 months if financial counterparties and some commercial clients took their money out. Quote, "Universal banks and global systemically important banks would generally be affected more severely than others by idiosyncratic liquidity shocks, as they typically rely on less stable funding sources, the ECB said in a press release. It added as well that the results were broadly positive, noting that current rules only required banks to have enough liquid assets to survive 30 days. Ecuador arrests rise to 477 people during unrest. Ecuador has arrested 477 people during unrest and protests since last week over President Lenin Moreno's economic austerity measures, the government said on Monday. Interior Minister Paula Romo told local radio Quito that the detentions were for vandalism, including the destruction of a dozen ambulances. Moreno said he will not tolerate disorder, nor will he overturn the elimination of fuel subsidies, as indigenous groups and others blocked roads for a fifth day running. United States Energy Secretary denies report about plan to resign. U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry said on Monday he had no plans to resign now or next month, denying a report that he was expected to announce his resignation in November. Asked about the report in Politico, the United States Energy Secretary told a news conference in Lithuania, "No, I'm here, I'm serving." Security recruits were targeted by a suicide bomb in Afghanistan. A suicide bomb targeted a minibus of recruits for the Afghan security forces in the eastern city of Jalalabad on Monday, killing at least 10 people and injuring 27, local government sources said. The bomb detonated in a rickshaw-like vehicle. Atoyullah Kogiani, the spokesman for provincial governor of Nangarhar, said. Casualties included recruits and civilians, including a child, local sources said. United States talks with Taliban to withdraw troops and end the 18-year Afghan war were halted last month by United States President Donald Trump. Those talks were expected to lead eventually to discussions of a ceasefire between the Taliban and Afghan forces and stability for the country. Mexico economy news. Data from the National Statistics Agency showed that when adjusted for seasonal swings, the gauge of spending on machinery, equipment, and new construction in Latin America's second largest economy tumbled by 9.1% compared to July of 2018. The annual decline was the biggest since November of 2009. Gross fixed income has fallen in annual terms in all but one of the 8 months for which data has been reported since López Obrador took office in December of last year. In unadjusted terms, Mexican gross fixed investment was 7.6% lower than in July of 2018. United States impeachment updates. A number of United States diplomats have been called to Capitol Hill for closed-door testimony this week as Democrats build their impeachment case against President Donald Trump, while the White House considers ways to slow down the process. Among those asked to testify, Gordon Sondland, the United States ambassador to the European Union, who was involved in efforts to get Ukraine to open the investigations, and Masha Yovanovitch, who was abruptly recalled from her post as United States ambassador to Ukraine in May. On Sunday, lawyers said a second whistleblower had come forward to substantiate an August complaint from an unnamed United States government official, which touched off the investigation. Deputy Secretary of State George Kent was also asked to testify on Monday. Yovanovitch is expected to appear on Friday. Boris Johnson comments on Brexit, quote, "What would like to hear from you, the European Union, now is what your thoughts are," he said. "If you have issues with any of the proposals that we've come up with, then let's get into the detail and discuss them. The issue is, what is the EU's objection to that? What is their suggestion? Where are they coming from? We haven't really heard the detail from them about what they think the problems are," in referring to his deal. India's Supreme Court halts tree felling for new Mumbai metro. "We direct the Maharashtra government not to cut any more trees in Ari," Justice Mishra, heading the two-judge bench, said, requesting that Maharashtra state maintain the status quo until the next hearing on October 21st. India's Supreme Court on Monday ordered a halt to the cutting of trees in financial capital Mumbai for an ambitious subway project that has sparked protests from activists opposed to the felling to build a train parking shed. The controversy over the trees has become a political issue in Maharashtra, which is holding state elections on the 21st of October. Italy taxes. Italy plans to renew corporate tax breaks, Economy Minister Roberto Gualtieri said on Monday. Gualtieri told a news conference organized by Italian business lobby Confindustria that the 2020 budget would renew the tax breaks, which would otherwise expire at the end of the year. Quote, "We also want to extend the incentives to those investments that support the transition to environmental sustainability," he added. Peace talks in Yemen. Yemen's Saudi-backed government and southern separatists are close to a deal that would end a power struggle in the southern port of Aden and see Saudi forces take temporary control of the city. Saudi Arabia, leader of an Arab coalition battling Yemen's Houthi movement, have been hosting indirect talks for a month between the government of Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi and the Southern Transitional Council to end the standoff that had opened a new front in the multifaceted war. STC is part of the Sunni Muslim alliance that intervened in Yemen in March 2015 to restore Hadi's government after it was ousted from power in the capital Sana'a by the Houthis. But the separatists, who seek self-rule in the south, turned on the government in August and seized its interim seat of Aden. Two Yemeni government officials told Reuters that Riyadh submitted a proposal to include STC in Hadi's government, while Saudi troops would deploy in Aden to oversee formation of a neutral security force in the city. Quote, "There is progress in the Jeddah talks. The conversation is still ongoing, and it is about bringing STC into the government, de-escalating tensions, and redeployment of forces," a third source familiar with the talks said on Monday. The Iran-aligned Houthi group, which controls Sana'a and most big urban centers, extended the offer last month after claiming responsibility for attacks on Saudi oil facilities on September 14th that Riyadh blamed on Iran, a charge Tehran denies. Easing Saudi Houthi tensions and resolving the Aden crisis would bolster United Nations efforts to pave the way for political talks to end the war that has killed tens of thousands and pushed millions to the brink of famine. Hadi's government asked Abu Dhabi to stop supporting the STC, which aspires to revive the former South Yemen Republic. Greek economy. In addition to broadening the tax base, the conservative government wants to cut taxes for businesses and increase social spending next year. The policies and plans are worth 1.2 billion euros, the budget said, and will help spur growth. Those plans are feasible as long as Athens, quote, "improves tax efficiency and reins in public spending as it has promised," said an economist, Nikos Maginas at National Bank. Cambodia Prime Minister threatens to deploy troops if opposition leaders return. Cambodia's Prime Minister threatened on Monday to deploy the military if leaders and supporters of the disbanded main opposition party return from exile next month in what he would regard as an attempted coup d'etat. At least 30 opposition activists have been arrested this year and accused of plotting to overthrow the government before the planned return from self-exile of Sam Rainsy, founder of the dissolved Cambodia National Rescue Party (CNRP), on the 9th of November. Last year, I don't know when that was. Last year, Hun Sen extended his role of more than 3 decades in an election in which his ruling party won all the seats in parliament. United States Supreme Court snubs University of Wisconsin appeal in patent fight with Apple. The United States Supreme Court on Monday refused to hear a bid by the University of Wisconsin's patent licensing arm to reinstate its legal victory against Apple Inc. in a fight over the computer processor technology that the school claimed the company used without permission in certain iPhones and iPads. The justices on the first day of their new term declined to review a lower court's 2018 decision to throw out the $506 million in damages that Apple was ordered to pay after a jury in 2015 decided the company infringed on the university's patent. Thank you for viewing the Touring News Daily broadcast October 7th, 2019. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the live broadcast on twitch.tv/touringnews if you want to see the behind-the-scenes look into how these get filmed. Thank you, be well, have a good day. Whew. All right, we're done.